All right, so we're going to get started in just a moment. I'm just getting out my chat. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Happy Tuesday. It's a great day. I'm in New York and it's like the beautiful spring day here. So I'm planning on getting outside. I have to take my kid for an x-ray first. Always something, right? Anyway, so I'm hoping to get outside. I hope you all will too. Great way to regulate while we're on the topic. All right, I'm just letting everyone come in. Welcome. Good morning. Okay, we're talking about one of my favorite topics in learning work. It's called regulation. I'm doing this webinar a little differently today. So if you attend a lot of my webinar Tuesday talks, you may see this flow a little bit differently. So I hope that you like it. I also just want to tell you that if you have topics that you're curious about, we're going to be doing writing in May. So there's Tuesday mornings, we'll be doing a series of talks on writing and how parents can support their children in writing. If you, though, have questions about really anything related to learning, just please make sure you write in because we're always interested in hearing from you and we want to be responsive. So I'm just going to get started, okay? All right. So today we're talking about why regulation is your child's superpower. I really believe this. I actually think it's adults' superpower too. It's our way that we can really access all of our brain is by controlling the way that we regulate our attention, our executive functioning, our emotions, all of the regulatory processes, even biology. I mean, if our hormones are sort of all over the place, it's really hard to access all that we can within our brains to learn and to produce and to be creative and to really be at that higher level thinking place. We need our brains to be regulated, okay? So in this webinar, I'm going to show you a little bit of the tools that I've come up with in my practice and that those here at Evolved Education Company use in our work. We have a boot camp that we use, which is, or teach, which is an executive functioning boot camp. And in those 8 lessons, we do a deep dive into your child's executive functioning, and really regulation is often something that we do address. It's almost every child needs to build skills and skill up in this area. And so if you want to kind of work a little bit on this with your kids, I have this PDF that you can request after the webinar that helps you just to start the process with your child around planning, performing, and reflecting. And then what are you going to do to show commitment to the learning process? So this would be a meeting that you would have with your child to work through some of the things we'll talk about today. So I'm going to get through this in about a half an hour. As usual, Becky Reback, our learning specialist that works here as well, is going to pop on at a certain point. I'm going to have her actually talk about a particular slide. So we're going to talk today about what is regulation, why is it important, and then strategies to improve regulation, and then Q&A. So let's just say you're in class, okay, and you're sitting in class. I want you to put yourself there and you have your computer open because that's what we're doing right now in Zoom land. And your teacher starts to talk to you and the rest of your classmates about this. Today in class, we're going to talk about the digestive system, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So what are all of the regulatory pieces that we have to take into consideration, right? Well, a child who experiences this may be thinking all of these things. Right? So they may be thinking in response, they hear digestive system. They're like, oh, I'm kind of hungry. Kind of thirsty. Did I pack some water? Shoot, I forgot to close the fridge at home. I'm in so much trouble. Wow, that girl over there has a really nice pink shirt. Pink is my favorite color. Maybe, oops, they just said it out loud. Right? And maybe they're also in this like wiggle state, right? So you see that there's a lot that goes on in the brain that we need to attend to so that we can give our full attention to something like this, right? Our brains are just toddlers all the time. They're just going in 1,000 different directions. That's what I find, at least. And so the more skills we can have to manage this, the better off that we are, right? So regulation means controlling oneself by oneself. So it means that your child has in them the ability to control themselves within whatever they're working on or whatever expectation they have, whether that be a chore, whether that be going to put away their clothing, put on their clothing in the morning, do their reading, complete their math homework, sit for a test. It all comes from their own self, okay? It's developed naturally with age. So as a child develops, they have more and more ability to regulate. So a very young toddler, you'll see, is going to act out and show their dysregulation a lot, right? That's very normal. As you get to be a teenager, and you're dealing with hormones and all of those things, you might see again some of that toddler behavior because it's really organically difficult for kids to regulate, especially when their biology is sort of all over the place, right? So we also, though, can learn to regulate, and I call it skilling up, okay? So you can skill up to regulate, and you as parents can be a partner in this process. I promise you can, even if your regulation is also needing attention, which, you know, quite frankly, I find this work informs me too. Okay. So here's sort of some missteps or some things to watch out for. I want to just present a couple ideas for you. So if you notice this happening, remember what I said over here? Regulation means controlling oneself by oneself. So oftentimes we see kids using other things in the world to regulate, right? And that's fine. It's a compensation tool that they're using. We want to notice it. We want to acknowledge it. It's not a shaming instance. It's not a bad or right or wrong thing. They are children. When they need something, they're going to try to get it to happen some way or another. Sometimes that means going out into the environment and getting some help. So just notice, though, when these things are happening. So if your child kind of uses the iPad or some kind of gaming system to kind of kick up dopamine and to cope with unpleasant feelings, then they're not actually regulating. They're using something else to regulate those unpleasant feelings. Everyone's going to have unpleasant feelings. That's part of the human experience. And sometimes those unpleasant feelings happen in math class or in science class or in English by reading or writing, right? And so if we sort of cope with those things, though, and deal with those things by using something outside, then we're not actually not developing those regulation pieces inside of ourselves, or our children are not developing their own skills. So what do? You know, you just notice these things as parents. You don't need to act right away. Just sort of start to be curious about it. Like, okay, so we noticed there's a little bit of this going on. Okay. Sometimes parents become the pacifiers, okay, and we regulate our kids, and this happens a lot for young kids. So, you know, young kids will use parents a lot. So we do this in sleep work, right? Like if kids are really needing the parent to pacify, they're not developing their own regulation and their own ability to regulate. I know for I was watching actually Mel Robbins. I don't know if anybody watches her on Instagram. It's really interesting stuff she puts out there, but she was talking about, I think it's called a borrower function. And what happens when kids interrupt you and you're on Zoom and you're working and your kids keep coming in and talking to you. They may be doing that because they're borrowing your functioning. So look it up. It's really interesting. I had a whole conversation with my kids over the weekend about this because I have 3 kids and they're all school age and they're all developing their regulation. And I had to tell them, like, listen, when I'm working and I have my door shut, you cannot come in. You're going to have to write down your question and you're going to have to wait for the answer. And that requires regulation, right? To wait for something that you want right now. So that requires some inhibition. It requires you not to be impulsive. It requires you to have that self-control and to wait for a result that will happen in the future as opposed to right this minute. This is all regulation skills. So you can start today by talking to your kids. And this is how I started the conversation. I just said, hey, you guys, you know, there's a woman I'm following on Instagram, and she was talking about her kids interrupting her on Zoom. And it's called the borrower function. And what it means is that when you're wanting to ask me a question, you're running in and asking you're interrupting my work to ask your question, to get your fix, to get your answer, so that you can be regulated, because it's too uncomfortable for you to wait. And so what I want you to do is I want you to actually get some skills for waiting. And we wrote down some ideas on what that would be like. And also just that sometimes we have to just wait, and it has to feel uncomfortable, and then we can get through it, and it's not going to be forever, right? So these are things that you can do right away just to help. A kid could avoid homework and studying because it requires some regulation. And so when you see kids avoiding their responsibilities or their expectations, they're avoiding. That is a technique that they're taking because the regulation could be at play. There could be other things at play, but sometimes it's regulation. The kid engages in risky and impulsive behavior. So if we're sort of, again, going on that borrower function story I was just telling you, maybe a kid is coming in and just like needing to satisfy whatever urge they're having in the moment. So I've used urge jars in the past with kids, where we put a penny or a button into a jar when they actually have something that they really want to do. They put it in the jar, and then if they really want to do it tomorrow, they'll be cued to kind of look at that jar and say like, oh yeah, I wanted to do that. Sometimes we write it down like in a notebook, and there's a little bit of a system to it. But you know, it's important that you notice if this is happening. It could be because your kids don't have enough skills to regulate. It really usually has to do with skills. Kid neglects feedback and does not improve grades. So this is a big deal in school right now. I was just talking with some admissions folks in a college, and I also spoke with someone in boarding school this week, and they were talking about their changing rubrics for admissions and what they're looking for now, because a lot of the testing stuff has been de-emphasized in their rubrics. They're looking for kids who are able to learn. They want kids who are able to look at feedback and take in feedback and adjust themselves going forward. They're looking for evidence of this happening in school, and they're looking for evidence of kids talking about it and talking about how they use feedback specifically to improve themselves. And so this is a really big deal. And I see a lot of kids, again, neglecting, avoiding the feedback because it feels bad, and we need to really talk about that and talk about the fact that it doesn't have to feel bad, right? It can actually feel great to get feedback and move forward in a different way that helps you to grow. Writing can be off track and underdeveloped, so this can be a regulatory issue. So if we have a kid who's really just writing and their sort of ideas are going this way, and then they're kind of underdeveloped this way, or they're getting it done in 5 seconds and turning it in, that means that they're not using regulatory skills as they write to make sure that things are organized and planned out, and that they are working through a process that happens over time. And hey, that causes, you know, a lot of issues for a lot of kids, because that means they have to work overtime. And that's, if you didn't catch my webinar on long-term assignments, you might want to go over to the YouTube channel and take a look at it, because it's really interesting how we talk about kids not wanting to work through that long-term process. There's a lot of biofeedback that's happening that's causing them to be in that wheelhouse. Okay, so we kind of like got to this a little bit, but just in case I'm not super clear, right? Regulation allows students to participate in learning, developing, and growing. It provides students with the ability to exist within a myriad of circumstances. So they're able to focus, they can practice inhibition, meaning I don't have to be impulsive. I can plan, I can wait for my gratification. I can manage time, I can prioritize, I can use my working memory. Working memory means holding things into your brain and using them and accessing them. That's a lot of writing and math work. But also, these are sort of the values that we, I think, as parents have when we're parenting. And this is what regulation allows kids to do in the long term and in the short term. So we can see the good in others when we can regulate. We can view problems as opportunities. We have a growth mindset. We can keep going during difficult times. We can have flexibility. We can maintain open communication. So when you look at these, right, it seems like such a like, this is why the title is what it is. Regulation is your kid's superpower. It's also your parenting superpower. It's where a lot of, I would urge you to really dig in here as you parent your kids and support your kids, not only in school, but in life. Because if you can have strong regulation skills, these are the kinds of adults we're producing in the world, which is really, I think, paramount and amazing, right? So strategies and tools. Okay. So, there's a lot of thought work that goes into regulation. So we do think alouds with kids. And this is, of course, where tutoring meets some psychology. Of course, we're not psychologists. We're not going to do, CBT therapy DBT therapy or any of those kinds of things that would be deemed medically necessary in terms of training and such. But certainly just observing what kids are self-talking to themselves. So we teach a program called SRSD writing in this company, and it's cornerstone of that program for teachers is to teach kids to have a self-talk plan. And when you're regulated as you're working and you understand the thoughts you're allowing to come into your brain, and that you're understanding that your thoughts control your feelings, which control your actions, which control your results and all the things, right? You have to really start with what the kids are thinking and get that down. You can model what you want your kids to think by thinking aloud yourself. That's always helpful, right? Hey, Becky, I see you're on. I'm going to let you have this slide, which you're just coming on at like the perfect time. So I'm just going to tell everyone here that Becky is a collaborative and proactive solutions provider. And I took her coaching program as a parent, and I think it's like a no-brainer. If you ask me, it's something to do as a parent because it gives you so many skills to actually partner with your kids and to be collaborative and help guide them along. It can be done at any age. So I'm going to let Becky kind of explain a little bit of this, but if we're talking about like regulation and you notice something that I mentioned before, right? Like, let's just say you're mentioning that, writing is off track and underdeveloped, right? That's what you're reading this writing. You're like, whoa, it's all over the place, right? So Becky, take us through like, what would how would the collaborative and proactive solutions model help parents to unpack that with their kids?
Yeah, so CPS is great because you're focused on expectations instead of behaviors. So if you were to think about that writing example, the expectation might be to write incomplete sentences, or to write without run-on sentences, or to write a 2-paragraph essay or something like that. So you're going to focus on the expectation and leave the behavior out of it. And the way that we do this is we look at a list of lagging skills. And I think when it comes to regulation, there's a lot of lagging skills that kids have because they're not really explicitly taught how to regulate themselves. So they might have some difficulty, on like rereading their work or something like that. So you would say something like, let's talk about the rereading your writing. So I notice you're having difficulty going back and rereading your essay before you turn it in. What's up? And then your kid has an opportunity to share. And really at this point, you're just listening and you're using very specific strategies to ask questions that will give you a deeper understanding of what's coming up for the kid. And why I think this is so important is that our kids are actually, even if you think you have this amazing relationship with your kid and they're really open and honest with you, they probably are. And our kids are really used to telling us what they think we want to hear. And so this conversation, it's called a Plan B conversation, is a great opportunity for your kid to really be open and honest and reflective about what's coming up for them for any given unmet expectation that you're noticing. And it also, because we leave behavior out of it, it's a very objective, non-judgmental way to engage them in a conversation, which also, again, then leads to a more open, honest, and reflective conversation with your kid. And then you get to listen to their concerns and what's coming up for them, why it's difficult for them to go back and reread their essay before they turn it in. And then you get to share your concerns. So you say something like, the thing is, you're missing you're missing to fix run-on sentences and it's lowering your grade or something like that. And then you come up with something that works for both you and your child together to help them go back and reread, or to come up with some type of solution so they can independently go back and reread. That was just one example. There's so many. But I think that if we're thinking about regulation, a huge part of regulation is being able to self-reflect and being able to think about what is coming up for you that's making it really hard to do whatever X, Y, or Z. And having these types of conversations, it's not like a direct and explicit instruction, but it's indirectly teaching your kid like to pause and reflect when something is going wrong for them and how they can work with you to, make it better next time, or make it easier next time, or less, combative, or whatever the situation may be.
Yeah. And listen, I've also gone through this with my own kids, who I think I have a pretty good relationship too. And when I went through it with Becky, it shocked me. Like, I was actually shocked as to what I had assumed. I think, I assume based on behavior, what's happening with my kid. And by having these skills that Becky taught me, I was able to have a conversation. And again, there's more to it, because there's actually language that you can use, because your kid may really not be used to, hey, I noticed you're having difficulty. What's up? They may just kind of stare at you and be like, or they might just tell you what you want to hear. And then you have to ask some more probing questions to really get a sense of really what's going on, and reset your relationship in a way that's kind of like, hey, no judgment. Like, I just want to understand, like, I'm here to help. And like, my understanding and your understanding are different. And I want to understand yours, your experience. This is your experience. Right. And if I go back to this slide, right, just at the very beginning, right, it's regulation is controlling oneself by oneself. Right. So we have to understand our kids' experiences, like, in depth, or we're not going to get to this, because we're just going to be then controlling everything from like our perspective. Mm-hmm. So that's why this is such a key component of the work that we do here, is this, because we want to really get at what this kid is actually, coming to the table with. Right. So there's a lot of like tools that I use with kids. And again, like, where a learning specialist comes in, and like, because Becky and I are both learning specialists, like, we're always curious, like, coming from this expectation, like, what lagging skills are there, and like, what can we teach into? How can we skill up? So sometimes it's about becoming thought aware, and sometimes it's about creating like feeling literacy, right? Like, understanding some of these actual feelings. Now, a lot of schools are doing more work here, but I know, like, I totally missed this class in school. I don't know a lot of these things. So as a parent, like, I have to skill myself up so that I can help my kids identify, like, it seems like you're confused. Like, that's okay. We can work through confusion. Let's, like, what do we do when we feel confused? Like, what's the thought that's causing that confusion, right? Sometimes kids need like a sensory diet, meaning they need to have certain tools in the classroom to really help them to regulate and come back. I know I used to do a lot of work with schools before the pandemic, and we would often teach classroom teachers about sensory diets. So if a kid was coming into the classroom and they felt really overwhelmed, and they got to a state in their regulation where they couldn't really learn, like they were feeling really busy or really anxious or really frustrated, we had to bring them back down to a place of regulation where they're ready to learn, by maybe having them squish a squishy, or sit in a flexible seating chair, or listen to a little bit of music just to calm, and then come back to a place of being ready to learn. Maybe your kid coming in from school, we're doing a lot of this hybrid work now. So kids are going into school and then they're being at home, and like a lot of adjusting that expectation of sensory regulation is happening for them. And maybe they need a routine when they're coming in from at homes, at school, they need to come into the home and have like 15 minutes just to like chill and deregulate before you're like, hi, how was school? Right? Like, so maybe they need a little bit of time. Right? And they can use their words to tell you this, like, I need to regulate. I tell my kids this all the time. Like, if I have a whole bunch of calls and then I go right to dinner, sometimes I'm just like really overstimulated, and I'll just put on like my earphones and I'll say, I just need to regulate. And I'll just tell them, and they kind of know what that means at this point. So I just want to show you one more slide here because we're almost at time, but this is sort of a tool I'm working with right now with one of the students I'm working with. And so I just want to explain it because you might be like, how do all these pictures go together, Mary? I promise they do. Okay. So we're working right now with a child who's coming into the classroom right now, and she's feeling really busy. Like there's a lot of stimulation there and she's feeling really overstimulated. So our goal is to actually give her a tool to use to bring her focus into the learning and into the lesson that she's supposed to be doing, instead of going over to the books or chatting with her friends or looking around the room at all the posters, right? So we gave her this 5 senses chart. We put it on a bookmark and we started just to practice giving her mindfulness around her space. So when she comes into the classroom, she's allowed to look around. She's allowed to, hear. She can take a smell. She can she does this funny, she's young. She does this funny thing with her mouth where she's just like kind of like tasting the room, if you will, giving a little bit of that sensory input. And then she's kind of like getting in her desk and just giving her a minute to just notice where she is. Okay. And if the teacher notices that she's not kind of doing this work, or she didn't look at her bookmark, the teacher gives her a sign, which is the please sign. And that's their code for look at your bookmark, right? And do what you need to do to regulate. So it's just an example. And this is just like something we totally made up just for this kid to come into the room. And it's a practice that's supported by the classroom teacher in a way that's like nobody knows what's going on, easy to use. And also the teacher doesn't have to go over and be like, look at your bookmark, because again, we're going back to this, right? Like I keep going back to this, but like anytime you're creating something with your kid, you want them to own the regulation, not you, right?
Mary, I just want to jump in and throw out there that if anyone doesn't know the term metacognition, it actually like goes hand in hand with regulation.
Yeah.
And metacognition is thinking about the way you think, basically.
Yeah.
That's a very simple definition of it. When you think about like regulating yourself is done by yourself, like you have to be metacognitive in order to think about what's happening in your body at that moment. And then how are you, like what works best for you? What kind of learner are you? What kind of regulator are you to use those tools? So sometimes kids need help. And Mary, what was just sharing was a perfect example of, we kind of taught this kid what she could do to regulate herself. And so, but by doing that, we're also teaching her, think about the way that you think and the way that what happens to your body when you enter a space, right? Yeah. So I think also in conjunction with teaching regulation skills, teaching kids to think about the way that they think and the way that they learn best and how they can reflect on that is going to automatically help them figure out how to regulate in a number of different instances. So if you think about like the writing example, like if the kid knows that writing is challenging for them and they think about what part of writing is hard for them, then they're going to be able to use some regulation strategies to kind of enhance their writing a little bit.
Well said, and so absolutely true. And again, this is like just the start of hopefully your education is as a parent, this 30-minute class is just kind of intended to give you some ideas. You can action some of these right away, but you can also start your own journey of understanding this a little bit more. I think a lot of us adults, because education has really uncovered this as such an important part of learning, and we as adults didn't have this knowledge when we were learning in such an explicit way, right? We're all kind of playing catch up. And that's okay, right? That's okay. So I just think it's important that you start this process. That's what we're here for. And that's why when we do work at Evolve, we don't just work with these kids and help them with the tools, but we're also working with you parents and helping you to scale up too. So, because when it all is working together, we see kids moving forward in such a nice way, right? So I'm just going to get through some of these last slides. I just wanted to see if there was anything else I wanted to cover in the last minute here. So Yeah, I would just say, like, I think my other point that I want to make here is just this expectations piece. So sometimes we do actually put our kids into situations where the expectations are just too much in terms of regulation. And I think you as parents can also really monitor this. So if you notice, for example, that your child has too many activities in the day and they're melting down in the afternoons, this would be a perfect example of, we have too much stimulation. We need to put in time just to stimulate, right? And so you're also looking again at this feedback and using what we talked about before to ask your kid about their experience, to monitor these expectations always. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to end the whole entire presentation with just a resource. Of course, we're always here for you. You can schedule classes with Becky to learn about collaborative and proactive solutions and go through that program with her if you'd like. You can also sign your child up for our executive functioning bootcamp, which will help them to gain tools in wherever they're at. We always start wherever they are and help them with those. And if you would like to set anything up with us, this is how you do it. You can just email Stephanie, and that is always how we begin. We have a conversation with you for about 15 minutes to explain what we can do, and you tell us a little bit more about your circumstances. And I hope today was helpful, and I'll see you very soon. We're finishing up executive functioning this month. We have one more talk this month, and then next month we're doing a series on writing. So I hope to see you there. It kind of blends in kind of nicely, actually. Thanks, Becky, for coming. It was so good to hear your wisdom.
Yes, thanks for having me.
All
Anytime.
right. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.